Prime location. Well, hi everybody. Thanks for coming to the Applied Math Colloquium. Our speaker today is Professor Jo Boaler from Stanford's Graduate School of Education, where she's a professor of math education. And as you will soon hear, Professor Boaler has a British accent. So I presume that you were born somewhere in the UK.
I was.
Yes, all right. So that's one of the wonderful aspects of today's talk. She also co-founded well, now it's considered a center at Stanford called U Cubed, which I have a feeling we'll be hearing more about. There is U Cubed at Stanford University. And you can follow her on Twitter at Jo Boaler. So you'll be hearing today about mathematical mindsets. Thank you very much for coming, Jo.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming. I'd love to know who's in the room, actually. Could I see who here is from Cornell? Could I see a show of hands? Virtually everyone. Who's not from Cornell? You. And come on in. I'm not sure where the chairs are.
You may want to.
There's a couple here.
You can also grab a chair from the room next door and wheel it in.
Oh, there's another one up there.
So I thought I'd start with a little introduction of who I am, because I'm sure many people here have no idea who I am. So Steve's right, I'm actually British, as he pointed out. And I mention that because not only do I have a funny accent probably, but it means I'm sort of mathematically a little bit different. In England, as you may know, we do not separate algebra from geometry. And I had a very different maths education than many people here, a lot less procedural, I think, than the typical US education. Maths, yes. And I was going to say, it also means I say different words, like cuboid and trapezium, and we do say maths and not math. And the reason for that, it's culturally what we say in England, but I like maths is actually short for mathematics. It's a plural word and is kept plural, which I like because I think mathematics, it was always plural to describe the many ways of being mathematical, and I think math sounds very singular to me, and you hear the expression do the math over here, which basically means do a calculation, I think. So anyway, maths is a broader sounding word, I think, so that's why I say maths. But I am a professor at Stanford. I am currently doing quite a lot of work with neuroscientists and collaborating with them, and I'll share with you some of the brain science. As Steve mentioned, we have a center at Stanford. It's called U Cubed. We started just a couple of years ago, and we now have 100,000 registered users, which is a lot for an education center. We have millions of people coming to the site every month. So I'll tell you a bit more about what U Cubed is, but one of the big messages that we're trying to get out there to everybody in the education system is that we now know that everybody's brains grow and change to an incredible extent. And what we have to get rid of in the system is this idea, it's really a myth, that there are people who are math people and people who aren't math people. And we know that that single idea is responsible for a lot of the underachievement in the system in the United States. And it's an idea that really is somewhat mythical. It doesn't really come from good science that we have. And so what does the brain science tell us? It tells us, first of all, our brain is our most complex organ. It's made up of over 100 billion neurons and several thousand connections between them. It's the most changeable organ in the body. We know that when we learn something, a synapse fires in the brain, and a synapse is like an electric current that moves between parts of the brain. And we know that synapses are a little bit like footprints in the sand, and that if you have a new idea or learn something, a synapse will fire. And if you go and form a very delicate pathway, and if you go back to that idea and learn it more deeply, that pathway will become a brain pathway that you continue to use. If you never go back to the idea, that pathway just washes away like a footprint in the sand. So a lot of the very strong evidence for brain plasticity came from my hometown of London. And this really shocked scientists at the time, but they decided that they would start to study the brains of London black cab drivers, because black cab drivers are an interesting group. You may have travelled in a black cab in London, but never known, I didn't know, that you have to be highly qualified to become a black cab driver, which includes studying for 4 to 7 years. And at the end of that time, the drivers take a test, which is just beautifully called the knowledge. And to pass the knowledge, you have to have memorized 25,000 streets and 20,000 landmarks in central London and every connection between them. It's a very difficult test. The average amount of time it takes to pass the test is 12 times. And very complex spatial training. So the brain scientists studied the brains of taxi drivers, and they found that at the end of this training period, they had a significantly larger hippocampus in the brain. And when the taxi drivers retire from being cab drivers many years later, the hippocampus shrinks back down again. So this was the first evidence of the very amazing plasticity of the brain, which really shocked scientists. And around the same time, a 6-year-old girl actually had half of her brain removed. She was having fits that doctors couldn't control, and they took this radical step of removing a hemisphere, expecting her to be paralyzed possibly for her whole life, because your brain controls your physical movements. And she, again, completely stunned the doctors and the scientists, because within months she was running around again, and they could only conclude that it was from this incredible plasticity of the brain. And we have many, many studies like this now, and one I wanted to share that came from Stanford recently is really important for everybody in education to know. They brought in 7 to 9-year-old children into the labs. Half of them had been diagnosed as having maths learning disabilities in school, and half of them were regular performing kids. And they actually studied their brains while they worked on maths, and this is what they found. They found that the kids with the learning disabilities had more going on in their brains when they worked on maths. Their brains were lighting up in more areas of the brain. And that may seem counterintuitive to people who sort of think that kids with learning disabilities maybe have less going on in their brains. They have more areas of the brain lighting up, which you actually don't want, because when you work on a maths problem, you want some focused areas of the brain lighting up. So what they did was they gave tutoring to all of the kids in both groups, 8 weeks of tutoring. And at the end of that time period, the kids who had been diagnosed as having learning disabilities not only had the same achievement as the other kids, but the exact same brain functioning. So this is just one of many studies that shows that kids' brains and adults' brains are incredibly adaptable. This one just recently came out, which I thought was very interesting, in a big international study of 294,000 people analyzing the impact of their genes on their educational success, could only find a 3% impact of their genes, and as they said, equivalent to 3 to 9 weeks of schooling. So we have a lot of evidence that tells us that everybody's brains grow and change, that children can learn any level of mathematics in school with the right teaching and the right messages, and I'll be talking a bit about what those are. But at the moment, schools are set up to decide which kids can do maths and which can't at a very early age, and we really have to change that. So one of the myths that I thought you might be interested in, and maybe is here at Cornell, is something that I've learned from my Stanford students. I teach undergrads at Stanford, and I always say to them, are you going to take maths classes? And they told me this. Many of them have said to me, oh, well, I'll take maths until I hit my wall. And I always say to them, your what? What's that? And they say, well, everyone has a wall. And in maths, you have a wall, and you can only go so far until you hit that wall. Well, the big news is there is no wall. I didn't know who this was, and one of my team found this image for me, and this is Kool-Aid Man, and helping us with talking about this myth. So I want to play for you a little film. I'm fortunate these days to be able to work with a filmmaker who's helping us to change what's happening in maths classrooms around the country. And she came to film when I was working with Kathy Williams, who's sitting here, who's the director of UQ, and she was the director of maths in a school district at the time, and together we were working with middle school teachers to change their teaching. And we're going to hear from some teachers and kids This is a little 2-minute clip from the film that's coming out. I'm not hearing any sound.
Yeah, we can check the sound.
We didn't check the sound. Okay, maybe we'll just look at the film.
Jake left.
The volume's up. Okay, we'll experiment a little bit.
Oh, there's a speaker.
That we have such widespread math failure.
Let's go back.
Yeah.
In the United States, people think people have a math gene. Either you're born with it or you're not. If you don't have it, then you just don't have it.
Teachers believe that, parents believe it, students believe it. And it's one of the reasons that we have such widespread math failure and math trauma in the States.
I hated math. I absolutely hated it. I felt like I was like a little, like I wasn't nothing. When I went into other classes, I was like, well, I'm already failing in that class. Why don't I just fail in these classes? I wouldn't really try. I wouldn't push myself.
It's amazing how many teachers have said to girls, don't worry, you don't need to be good at math. Math isn't your thing. Don't worry about that. When kids get the idea that they're not a math person and they start this sort of downward trajectory, many careers are cut off from them. And this happens to a lot of women, unfortunately. Their career options shrink massively. So we have a situation now where most engineers and most people working in computer science are men.
I hated math, to be honest with you, when I was younger. I felt that I couldn't do the problems quickly, and I thought you had to do them really fast. I think a lot of students come in with some of the same ideas that I had as a middle school student. They think that if they make mistakes, that means that they're not smart. Working with Joe has been really helpful in breaking down those stereotypes.
So what do you mean when you said it's not working?
Wait, did you just
Can I borrow this one?
Yeah, that she her question.
I have like a connection with math now, definitely. Like it's like I'm open and I feel like alive. I'm definitely like more energetic in science. We use math a lot, and I feel like when they bring up math subjects, I'm like, oh, I learned that already. I could be open to like learning new things.
Well, that's what we're trying to get multiple methods.
Yeah, but we're trying to figure out.
So, it's really important that we change the messages we give to students in colleges and schools. And I want to show you a bit of what happens when we change those messages. You may have heard of or know the work of Carol Dweck. It's very well known now. But what she has found that everybody has a mindset. You do, I do, kids do. And people with a growth mindset really believe that they can learn anything. People with a fixed mindset think that their intelligence is kind of limited. And what we know is that those mindsets are really important. This graph shows you kids going through 7th and 8th grade learning maths. They have nothing different, same teachers, but the kids on this lower line are the kids with a fixed mindset, and these are the kids with a growth mindset. And we know that those kids who believe differently are growing and going onwards and upwards all the time. We also know
their mindset.
Sorry?
How do you measure their mindset?
So their mindsets are measured with a survey that they have that's pretty reliable and they've used a lot. We also know that mindset is particularly important for girls and for students of colour. Those are the kids who, for one reason or another, do not believe in their potential as much, and it's very, very important. So there are things that give kids a fixed mindset, and one of them is this idea that some people are gifted and some are not. And this was a really interesting study, came out last year, published in Science magazine, the premier journal in the field. And what they did was they interviewed university professors to find out how much they believed in the idea of a gift, that you had to have a gift to do well. And what they found was that the more that any field valued giftedness, the fewer women and the fewer African American students were in that field. And that held across all 30 subjects they looked at. It was pretty amazing. So you may not be able to see that this clearly from the back, but these are the science subjects up here, and these are humanities subjects. And you may notice straight away that math is right out here, with this axis is telling us how much professors believed in the gift, and the y-axis is telling us about the proportion of women in the field. So math is one of the most extreme. Interestingly, the philosophers kind of match the math professors in their belief that apparently you have to have a gift to learn philosophy. So that's an interesting graph to look at. You'll see neuroscience is right at the other end of the spectrum, and the neuroscientists know, of course, that there's no such thing as a gift, but we have to think if professors' ideas of giftedness are hurting adults to that extent. What are they doing? What happens when we give young children that idea? And one of the reasons it's hurtful, and it's hurtful for people who are given the message they're gifted, as well as those who are given the message that they have no gifts. Because if you believe in the gift, if you've been told you're gifted, and then at some point you have to struggle to learn something, then that struggle is actually devastating, because it starts to make people think that they no longer have the gift. And I met this, I was telling Steve a story earlier, in one of my teacher students at Stanford, just a couple of weeks ago, was telling me that she'd always been told she had the gift, she had a math brain, she was a math major at UCLA, and when she got to UCLA, she started to struggle with the math. And so she dropped out and did not become a math major because she thought she no longer had the gift. And that is the problem, and that is why that message is so damaging. Equally damaging, it turns out, is the smart word. This is one of the ways people get a fixed mindset. In the US, it's very common for parents to praise their children for being smart a lot of the time. But what we know happens when you get that praise is when kids are praised for being smart, at first they think, oh great, I'm smart. But then later when they mess up, they think, oh, I'm not so smart. And they're evaluating themselves on this fixed notion. So we know that we don't want to praise people for being smart. It's fine to praise the things they've done and say, it's fantastic you've learned that, but not to give that smart praise. We know that actually it has such power, that word, that it has immediate impact. In one of Carol Dweck's studies, they had 2 experimental groups. They were all children who worked on difficult maths questions, and one group was then praised for being very smart, and the other was praised for working hard. And they were immediately then offered a choice of an easy or a hard question. 90% of the group praised for being smart chose the easy question, and the converse happened in the other group. And they chose the easy question because once you've been told you're smart, you don't want to have people realize you're not smart or think you're not smart. So it is the reason that fixed mindset thinking is the reason that many girls don't choose STEM subjects, and it's very important. But I also find that smart word is kind of narrowing in our language. And in my classes at Stanford, I always say, we're not going to describe people as smart anymore. And smart, you wouldn't believe how often I hear that word walking across Stanford campus. Everybody is telling everybody who's smart, who's not smart. So we decided we're not going to use smart. And actually, when people describe things and they don't use that word, they describe actual aspects of people's behavior and thinking in a much more interesting way. So people will say, oh, you're so smart, and they'll stop themselves and say, oh no, that was a lovely idea, or that was a really nice way of thinking, or whatever the thing is we're talking about at the time. So that's part of what we need to change. But another super interesting piece of evidence we have from brain science is around the role of mistakes. In fact, we now know that mistakes, this is wonderful news for all of us, mistakes grow your brain. Mistakes cause synapses to fire in the brain. And in the study that showed this very compellingly, or there's been a few studies, what they found was they had people with their MRI scans doing tests. When they made a mistake, synapses fired in the brain. When they got work correct, synapses didn't fire. So that's really interesting. And when I describe that to maths teachers, they'll often say to me, but surely you had to work through the mistake and get it right for synapses to fire, for your brain to grow. But no, what they actually found was this. There were 2 possible synapse firings. The first comes when you make a mistake, and the second comes if you become aware you've made a mistake. So then people say, well, how can your brain grow? How can a synapse fire if you make a mistake and you're not even aware you've made a mistake? And the best knowledge we have on this is synapses fire when you make a mistake, even if you don't know you've made the mistake, because it's the time when your brain is struggling and your brain is challenged. And we know that the times that you're struggling and challenged are the most beneficial for brain growth. And we actually want kids to be sitting in maths classrooms struggling. Teachers have often design classes so people get the work right most of the time, and they think that's good and people feel good, but actually we want people to be struggling, making mistakes, and growing on from that. So, but another amazing thing that came from that study was this. These are heat maps, voltage maps of the brain when people made mistakes, and these are the people with a growth mindset, and when they made a mistake there was much more brain growth happening than when people with a fixed mindset made a mistake. So this starts to give us evidence that brain scientists have known for a long time, which is that what we believe and what we think about ourselves actually changes our cognition. So we tend to think of these things of cognition and what we believe and how we feel as being very disconnected and separate. But what this shows you very clearly is if you believe in yourself, if you go into a situation and you are thinking to yourself, I know I can do this, I believe in myself, and you make a mistake, your brain will grow more than if you go into that situation thinking, I don't think I can do this.
This is correlation, not causation so far. You're going to show the causality part of it?
So this is actually showing us that when we make a mistake, our brains fire and grow. And if you believe in yourself, your brain will fire and grow more. So there's not anything between, I don't think, those.
Except for that it could be that the people who succeeded that feel.
Yeah, it could be that if you're somebody who succeeded a lot,
Maybe like that.
that you, but those people, yeah, I mean, we could try and come up with different theories for that. But
No, can you coach somebody from one group to the
yes,
other?
yes, you can, yeah. And if people change their mindset, they can change into a growth mindset. I don't think they're coached in this study, but so another really interesting study. This one was shocking to me, and I see research studies all the time. This was an experimental study where they had hundreds of students. All of them, they were high school English students, and all of them wrote an essay, and all of them were given critical diagnostic feedback from their teacher. And half of them got an extra sentence at the end of the feedback. And the students who got the extra sentence achieved significantly differently a year later, particularly students of color. So what was that sentence? How can a sentence do that to students? Turned out that at the end of the feedback from the teacher, the sentence that was put at the bottom for half the students was this: I'm giving you this feedback because I believe in you. And the kids who got that sentence at the end of their work did significantly better a year later with no other change. Teachers didn't know who got the sentence. So what these things are telling us is when you change people's beliefs about what they can do, when they think that their teacher believes in them, amazing things happen to them. And when I share this with teachers, I don't say, look, I'm sharing this so that you write on every kid's paper, I'm giving you this feedback because I believe in you. One of the teachers said, we don't put it on a stamp. I said, no. Don't put it on a stamp, no. But as I said, I share this because we know that kids are sitting in maths classrooms all the time thinking, what does my teacher think of me? Why did they give that person that question and me that question? And we have to keep having students know we believe in them. Even if we're saying to them, I know you can do this. I believe in you. So we've focused for so long on which curriculum to use and how to teach a fraction. And we've really ignored the fact that kids are sitting in maths classrooms thinking, I can't do this. And it's only now that the full extent of that, the need to change that is coming to light. So some things we're doing at UQ that you might find interesting. We have an online class. We have one for teachers, but we also have one for students where we change students' mindsets. And it's interactive lessons that's online that teaches them about having a growth mindset, and it's for all ages of students. We've had about more than that, 130,000 students take it, but we've just completed a randomized controlled trial where teachers who taught 2 classes gave one of their classes this little MOOC to take and not the other one. And we've just, we have the data from 4 large California districts now, and the kids who took the class scored significantly higher on all of these things, on the smarter balance scores, on proficiency, concepts and procedures, data analysis, communication. They had a higher school GPA, a higher math GPA, a higher science GPA, and a higher English language arts GPA. And I share this as just one indication of what happens when we change kids' ideas about what they can do. It really has a pretty profound effect. So this is our center at Stanford, where we share this brain science, but we also translate this into a lot of things for teachers. We gave away to the country a week of maths lessons, both last year and this year, for the start of the school year. And those have been downloaded millions of times by teachers and used across the country. So there's a lot of things going on. We're working on a new K-8 curriculum. And I think I mentioned, we started with about 5,000 people on our site. We had 3 million last month. So there's a lot of attention, and a lot of teachers are very excited about these ideas. But I've talked about the brain science so far. What I want to talk about is math, and how we actually teach maths differently, and that's a lot of what's on this site. And before, we're going to look at a maths problem together in a minute, but this is another very important thing that we've learned from brain science, that we also work hard to get out to the general public and teachers, and that is, we now know that speed and time pressure actually block the brain from working, stop mathematical processing. This is an image of the brain from Sian Beilock, and we know that math facts, for example, are held in the working memory section of the brain. But if you ever feel stressed or anxious, what happens is the working memory becomes blocked, and you cannot recall math facts. It's physically impossible. So we know that this sort of stress and anxiety is extremely damaging for kids, but what do we do in classrooms? This is from my local school district, 50 questions taken 3 minutes from first grade upwards. So these sort of time tests are the onset of math anxiety for a large number of students. I teach this undergrad class at Stanford, and many of the students in the class are somewhat math traumatized. And I always say to them, what happened? When did this happen? And they'll always say, I used to love math, and I used to, until. And for many of the students, they'll pinpoint the moment in 3rd or 4th grade when they started doing time tests. And for them, they either became anxious and so couldn't process mathematically, or some of them were very successful on them, but at this point, they decided that math was this shallow activity of fast recall, and they just turned away from the subject. So the irony of this, of course, as many of you probably know, is that many mathematicians, who we may think of as the greatest math thinkers, are not fast with arithmetic. And one I like to quote a lot is a Fields Medal winner, who I'm sure you probably know, called Lawrence Schwartz. And he wrote an autobiography talking about how when he was in school, he was made to feel stupid. And this is from his autobiography. He says, "I was always deeply uncertain about my own intellectual capacity. I thought I was unintelligent, and it's true that I was and still am rather slow. I need time to seize things because I always need to understand them fully. Towards the end of 11th grade, I secretly thought of myself as stupid, and I worried about this for a long time. I'm still just as slow, and at the end of 11th grade, I took a measure of the situation and came to the conclusion that rapidity doesn't have a precise relation to intelligence. What is important is to deeply understand things and their relations to each other. This is where intelligence lies. The fact of being quick or slow isn't really relevant." So, unfortunately, in maths classrooms across the country, speed is very important. Many students think that to be good at maths, you have to be fast at maths. We released a paper for teachers, it's called Fluency Without Fear, talking about how kids can develop math facts and enjoy it and understand them. And it shared some of the brain science. This has had a big impact and been used across the United States actually to pull time tests out of districts, so that's been great. But generally, we need to stop associating maths with speed because it discourages those deep, slow thinkers like Lawrence Schwartz from going forward in maths, and that's a really important thing that we want to do. So, but what we try to communicate to teachers and others is that if we want to change students' mindsets, we have to change maths classrooms, and it's very hard to have a growth mindset when maths class is a series of closed questions that you get right or wrong. Because some students can do those questions, some students find it hard. The questions themselves transmit fixed ideas about math learning, that you can do it or you can't. And what we teach teachers is that questions have to have space inside them for learning. So unfortunately, we're in a situation now in the US where most maths classrooms offer maths more as a performance subject than a learning subject. And what I mean by that is if you ask most kids in maths classrooms, what do you think your role is? What are you here to do? They'll tell you they're there to get questions right. And they don't say that about any other subject in the curriculum. So this really came home to me recently, actually, when a colleague, Rachel Lambert, said her 6-year-old son had come home from school saying he didn't like maths. And she said, why? What's going on? And he said this. He said, math is too much answer time and not enough learning time. So you may look at that and think, wow, that 6-year-old's very reflective, but actually, kids know. They know from kindergarten up that math is different. It's about answering questions, and it's not about all the different ways of thinking and working that other subjects have. So we teach teachers that we have to give kids tasks that have space inside them for learning. That's a growth mindset maths task. Whereas a fixed mindset task is one that's really just looking for an answer. So I want to illustrate this now with you. It's a bit of a thought experiment by getting you to think about a maths problem with me. Kathy is going to hand this out. And this is what it looks like. So here, this is a function, and I'm sure you've seen these before many times. And we have 3 cases of squares here. And this is the first case. In the second, there's more squares, and then the second, there's even more squares. And in maths classrooms, this is usually given out with a number question, like how many squares would there be in the 100th case, say. But I want you to think about this on your own for a minute, and I'd like you to think about it only visually. So without any numbers, I know that's hard, no algebra, no numbers, but just entirely visually. My question is, where are the extra squares? There are more squares here. Where are they? And there are more squares there. Where are they on the diagram? So if you could think about that on your own for just a moment. And feel free to write on the diagram, draw, whatever you want.
Could you restate what we're supposed to think about?
Yeah, where are the extra squares? There are more squares here than here.
Okay.
Where are they? And there are more squares here. Where are they? So on your own, just see if you can see where you think those extra squares are. So if you've had enough time to see where the extra squares are, turn to the people around you and find out where they see the extra squares. We'll have a look at all together, I think, about this. Right, so I've given this question out now to many different people, to sixth graders, to undergrads, to CEOs of businesses, all sorts of people, and what's amazing and lovely about it is people will see it in many different ways. So I will show you some of the ways, and I'm interested to hear how you guys saw it, but I asked students and others to give names to their ways of seeing it. And it was my undergrads at Stanford who said this way was like a raindrop method, where they saw extra squares coming down like drops of rain. Who saw it in that way, the raindrop way? Can I see a show of hands? It was my undergrads also who said, oh, it's like a bowling alley with a row of Skittles that come in. This is the bowling alley where they see the row. Who saw it in this way, the bowling alley? It was a teacher who said to me, oh, it's like a volcano, the center goes out and the lava comes out the side.
I did not.
Who saw in this way, the volcano way? There was another teacher who said, oh, it's like the parting of the Red Sea, the shape divides, and a new center. Who saw it in that way? That's a Red Sea way. Some people see it as a growth in an outside overall triangle. Did anyone see it in the triangle way? And similarly, some people see the empty triangles that are at the sides of the shape. Negative space. We see cultural differences, which is really interesting. So when we were here on the East Coast, we never hear this one in California, but I was in Boston, and they said, oh, it's like snow when the buildings come out after the snow. That's interesting. When I gave this to my new teacher candidates a couple of weeks ago, one of them said, oh, it's like Minecraft. So I don't know if you know Minecraft, but this is one of the trees in Minecraft, and this is what he was seeing. Did anybody see it in that way, the sideways extra? It was a teacher in New Mexico, I remember, who said, oh, it's like Wayne's World. I've seen that film. Stairway to Heaven, access denied. And then this way is very interesting, which I think is the square. If you watch the red square on the left, you can see you can rearrange the shape each time. Like squares. Did anybody see it this way, the square way? So this is one of the things we illustrate with this math problem. When it's given out in classrooms, it's usually given out with the number question of how many would be in the 100th case, how many would be in the nth case. And what happens is kids count. So they'll say in the first case there's 4, in the second there's 9. They may stare vertically down these columns for a long time and see that there's always one more than the case number squared to give us the total number of blocks, which gives us our n+1 squared expression. And actually, I gave this out in a room of teachers one day, and there was a table of teachers. They were high school teachers who didn't listen to my instruction to think about it visually, and they did this. And they drew a table, and they drew it all out, and they called me over, and they said, "We're finished. It's n+1 squared." And I said, okay, so why do you think this is squared? Why do you see this squared notation here? No idea, no clue. So this is why it's squared. This is why you see that in the function. And in fact, whichever way you saw it visually would relate to a different algebraic expression. And all of those expressions would, of course, be equivalent and come to n+1 squared. So when we give this question to kids and we ask them the visual question, we do what we did with you. We ask them first, how do you see it? And what happens is, kids see it in all sorts of different ways. They have really rich discussions. They understand why their function is x+1 squared and can tell us exactly why, how the function grows. Functions are a really important part of mathematics. But for kids who only see the table, they don't have any of these functions, they don't have these discussions, or they don't have these ideas, and they don't learn as deeply. So I use this question to illustrate how you can change a maths question in a small way. Same question, really, but just asking the kids first, how do you see it, changes everything for the discussion. So part of the reason we're learning more about this in brain science, and this is, I thought, really interesting. This is just coming out from the neuroscience group I'm working with, and we just co-authored a paper together on this, which I brought with me, showing how important it is to think visually about mathematics. And in fact, what they now know is that there are 5 brain networks that come into play when we work mathematically, including just doing a calculation. Different areas of the brain light up and communicate with each other. 2 of those areas are visual pathways, the ventral and the dorsal visual pathway. And in fact, the dorsal visual pathway is the core brain region for representing knowledge, the knowledge of quantity. And so what we're learning now about this visual thinking is our brain is processing things visually when we work on mathematics. Whether we want that to happen or not, or whether we feel comfortable with visual, it's very important that this visual area of the brain is stimulated and working. And as kids develop mathematically, the kids who are achieving more and advancing more mathematics are not just strengthening one area of their brain which deals with abstract math, but they're actually advancing because their brain is communicating more between different pathways. And this is a lot of text on here, but what they're finding is as children get older, the visual pathway develops and the brain becomes better and more specialized at seeing different visual number forms and becomes more interactive. So connecting the visual processing of visual with symbolic numbers. So that communication between brain areas is very important. It predicts kids' achievement. It's not really helped in school maths classrooms where kids sit for hundreds of hours, particularly in high school, never engaging visually with maths, but it should be. And one of the key things, this area, I was telling the grad students about this earlier today, is a stunning example of how research that is known by scientists and others is not getting out to the right places. This shows this more than any other finding I think I've seen. So turns out the brain scientists know, I was surprised by this, something pretty incredible, which is this, that when we work on maths, even as adults, a brain area lights up that is seeing fingers. And when we calculate, when adults calculate, even if you don't use your fingers, this brain area that's seeing fingers is lighting up. And the more difficult the problem you work on, the more likely this brain area is to light up. And so the brain scientists call something important finger perception. So you test for your degree of finger perception by having somebody putting your hands under a book or a desk and have somebody touch the fingers. And how easily you can say which fingers are being touched is the test for finger perception. So some pretty incredible things about finger perception. The better your finger perception, the higher your maths achievement. College students' degrees of finger perception predicts their scores on calculation tests. And finger perception in grade 1 is a better prediction of maths achievement in grade 2 than test scores. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
What's the question you asked somebody?
finger perception is how well you know your
Number the
fingers.
fingers from 1 to 5.
You don't. Well, the test for it, they just have people touch fingers while they
Top of the
can't
finger,
see.
like you're showing us.
Yeah.
Not fingertips.
So, oh no, I don't know where on the finger. I think maybe fingertips.
And the question they ask is,
Which finger?
when
Which
you call
finger?
the finger, on pointer, middle, or the finger.
I don't think it matters as long as you.
So do you encourage our first graders to learn to play the piano because they're-
Yes, so this is the reason that musicians are often better at maths. And there are other things that help with that, like patterns, but they know now that this is why musicians are very good. Yeah.
So this is, of course, it begs the question about the first one with respect to sort of plasticity. So can you get better?
Definitely,
Okay.
definitely, yeah.
It seems like that's-
Definitely. So,
But does this suggest
well-
we should replace the math SAT with the finger perception?
yes. Excellent idea. Replace the math SAT with finger perception, I agree. So what was amazing to me was the brain scientists have known this for a long time. In 1999, this is a leading brain scientist saying, without finger perception and finger counting, numbers will never have a normal representation of the brain. But what's happening in schools and homes around the country, people regard finger use as bad, as babyish. Students are told they're not allowed to use their fingers. When we stop people using their fingers, that's like halting a mathematical development in the brain. So the recommendations of neuroscientists are that fingers should be the manipulative teachers use. Forget the other ones. Fingers are the most important. We don't forget the other ones, but definitely use fingers. I discovered something interesting about fingers. It turns out that if you're from Europe, you count differently with your fingers than if you're from the States. I just learned this.
Has finger perception been correlated with other kinds of skills, such as verbal?
I don't know. I don't answer. Maybe
How strong is the correlation?
Sorry?
How strong are the correlation?
They're strong. I mean, they're highly significant.
Is this all culture or just US or what? Is that
These studies, I think, have been done in, well, at least Europe and the US. I don't know if it's been done everywhere. And, interesting cultural differences. When I was sharing this the other day, a teacher from India said, oh, well, when we count on our fingers, we count each finger as 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. As I said, I've learned that we count up differently in England than you do here, and in other countries too. But the neuroscientists say that fingers should be the physical support for learning arithmetic, and this kind of makes me laugh. They said that schools should have a greater focus on finger discrimination, and as you know, I mean, no school focuses on finger discrimination or curriculum. Nobody even knows what it is when we go out and talk to the teachers. And we published an Atlantic article with this in it. And that's been sent around a lot. So this is part of what we're trying to do through our center, is get this research knowledge out. And we don't just send out the journal articles, we send out with our articles different finger activities for kids to do that will help them develop finger perception. They're the activities the neuroscientists use in their training. So when we go out and work with teachers, a question comes up a lot, which I was chatting with Steve about earlier. This question of really what is mathematics? And I think that's a really important question for everybody to think about, because people have very serious misconceptions about what mathematics is. I like to quote from this amazing woman, Maryam Mirzakhani, and her experiences, which are very interesting. You may know she won the Fields Medal last year, and what I loved, first of all, Maryam's work is entirely visual, and what I loved was a lot of mathematicians, when they talked about her winning the Fields Medal, were all talking about her spectacular theories and how they'd connected previously unconnected areas of mathematics. A lot of the pictures in the newspapers across the world when she won the Fields Medal were of her sitting with visuals all around her, and she said that her daughter thinks she's an artist. She has a 5-year-old daughter. But Maryam, as you can read in the different articles, was told in 7th grade that she couldn't do math. And, just tells us again how we get things so wrong about kids and these terrible messages. And she talks about how that whole year she didn't engage and just really turned away from math. I mean, fortunately for the world, she had other teachers who believed in her. But Maryam actually asked me to go and chair the PhD defense of one of her students. It was such an interesting experience for me because I went over to the math department at Stanford, and her student, who was a young woman, was walking around, filled all the boards with visuals. What was really interesting for me, though, was a number of points in the defense, and maybe this is not news to any of you guys, but it was to me. But a number of points in the defense, one of the mathematicians on the committee asked her a question and said something like, what would happen if, blah, blah, blah. To which she stopped and thought and said, I don't know. And the mathematicians all went, no, I don't know either. And then they just carried on. And this happened like 4 or 5 times in the defense, and each time the same thing. She said, I don't know. And they said, no, I don't know. And I thought, wow, in an education defense, that just wouldn't happen. Here, I was asked a question, and the students say, I don't know, and we all go, no, I don't know either. Just wouldn't happen. So I just thought, wow, this is so interesting. And I mean, this is the nature of mathematics. It is this unexplored terrain with lots of unanswered questions. But what hit me when I was sitting there was I thought, wow, if I had brought a 13-year-old student into this room with me, they just would not recognize the subject. And that is part of our problem, is that maths and school is so disconnected now from real mathematics, as I know it. But so we talk about different types of maths, and one-dimensional mathematics is really about copying a teacher's methods. And what we call multi-dimensional mathematics is this much more dimensional maths. And if I've got time, I think I may have just to play you a couple of little clips of high school. We actually studied high school students over 4 years going through these different approaches. And I won't show you that, but so I wanted to show you a couple of small clips. And the first one comes from traditional math classes that we followed kids, as I said, for 4 years through these classes. And I want you to think about, as we watch this clip, it's just a 1-minute clip, is what are these kids doing? How are they engaging in math? So here we go. This is
what S minus A, and A happens to be a 3 here. And then we want to go S minus 4. And then we want to go S minus 5. And end it with a parenthesis. So on a separate piece of paper, I would like you to try these 3 problems. Demo notes? Let's demo notes. Yeah, we're about to do some practice here.
What are these kids doing? Anybody there?
Honestly.
Copying. So we asked the kids the same question, well, sort of the same question. We said to them, hundreds of kids, what does it take to be successful in math class? And amazingly, 97% of them said the same thing. They said this. They said you have to pay careful attention. As we know, not the most productive learning activity. So now I want to take you into a multi-dimensional maths classroom from our study. We followed kids, as I said, through 4 years. Same question, how are these kids engaging in math? But what I explained before we watched the clip is they were using a method that's been studied experimentally, where the teacher asks the students a problem before they know how to solve the problem. So in studies, they've actually contrasted these 3 different things. What happens in most math classrooms, we teach kids methods and then they work on problems. The other thing they looked at was having kids discover methods. And then in the third condition, they had kids work on problems, and then later, after they'd struggled and realized they needed something, they would teach them how to solve the problem. And what we find is it is these kids who achieve at significantly higher levels. So we're going to see that kind of in action here. We're in the same age classroom as the last clip, and it's a pre-calculus class, and the teacher has given each group of kids a lemon and a big carving knife. I know, seems risky, but. And she has said to them, they haven't learned calculus yet, and she has said to them, how would you find the volume of a lemon? And so we're going to watch a couple of clips. This is a 2-minute clip with a couple of kids describing how they think they would find the volume of a lemon.
Regular force on your graph, and then you like spin it around in axis, and then from there you're supposed to get like an equation for like one of the thingies. I don't know. That's how you do that. Sorry.
Sure, yeah. Well, how we thought about it was we used simulation too, but then we thought of it like. So we thought about it with summation too. We thought of it like this. So we said, okay, it's on a quadrant thing here, whatever. And just to make it easy, we said, okay, like that. Like that. And so this is a function, right? And then this is a function. And then we said, what if we found out little rectangles right here? Then that would give us like a little strip of the lemon. That would give us like a little slice, 2-dimensional slice, 2D slice. But then we still have to rotate it 360 degrees, not 360, 180 degrees in order to get the whole part of the lemon, and then you multiply it by 2. You know what I'm saying? So that's why we were trying to figure out a way to rotate it 180 degrees. So it's kind of like yours, but then we just thought of it this way instead of this way.
Why would we just graph in the first place like that? Why just measure it?
Yes.
Because summation is going to give you exactly what the area is, but if you measure it, it might be a little messed up.
How do you get the exact graph of it?
Well, if this is a function, right, because the limit is like this, it's not going to be straight, it's going to be like kind of curvy.
So what are these kids doing? Can anyone tell me? So we followed these kids through 4 years. The students we just saw were at this school in a much more urban setting, and they started high school significantly lower levels than the kids going through the traditional approach. Within a year, they caught up with them, and within 2 years, they were significantly outperforming them. So these kids are working on multi-dimensional mathematics. There were many different things that they were doing and ways of working. And what we know from this research about having kids work on a problem and then later tell them the method is if they struggle and they're trying to work out how to work out the volume of a lemon, but then later they learn a full method, their brains are kind of primed to learn that method. They're interested, they need it. So it's kind of a flipping around of having kids, not the method and the problem, but the problem and then the method. So I'm going to skip through to the end because we're
Did
out of
anyone
time.
squeeze it and measure the volume of the juice?
That. I like that. We could definitely do that. So if you would like to learn more about this, I have a new book. This is really cheap on Amazon. It's only $10. And a TED Talk, which is just the 12-minute version of this, if you'd like to find that. But the last thing I want to share with you is this. When we make these changes for kids, it does incredible things for them. And when we interview them, they talk in the most amazing ways. They say things like, I feel open. You heard the girls say that earlier. I feel open. I feel alive. And what we give kids when we change maths for them is that it doesn't just increase their test scores, but it gives them an intellectual empowerment that they take into the whole of their lives. And this is my last slide. And it's a boy from the film we saw earlier talking about how math changed for him.
Math class last year was notes and just handouts, and you were your own little box. You were just boxed in. You were like by yourself. It was every man for themselves. But now this year, it's just open. We're a whole big, like, it's like a city. We're all working together to create this new, beautiful world. I think the challenges and like the future that lies ahead for me, like oh, if I keep on pushing, if I keep on doing this someday, I'm gonna make it.
So, I will finish there. I'll invite you to come see what we have on our website and what we're doing. We have a paper that's about the visual brain stuff I thought might be interesting if you want to read more of that. And I think we have some time for questions, I see. Yes, so the blue shirt, we'll start with you and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
You had three different approaches on the board.
Yes.
One of them was traditional, one of them was discovery mode, and the third one was the one which you said makes the most impact. Could you make a comment about why the discovery mode was less successful, and what were the key differences?
I don't think this means that discovery-based teaching is not successful. I think this was an experimental study where they had particular methods that they wanted people to know, and they left some students to just discover them, which that in their particular study wasn't an effective thing to do. But I think, I mean, there are many studies of kids who are discovering things mathematically, and they do very well. So I wouldn't say that's telling us much about that as a broader method. Yeah.
Back in the Paleolithic era for neuroscience, the late 70s when I was in grad school, I was watching 60 Minutes, and Morley Safer had a segment on this miraculously successful Korean method of doing calculations using your fingers called Chisan-bok, okay? And they piloted this in some schools, and they were not sure why it was working so well. The abacus-like way of using your fingers to do complicated computations, and I'm wondering whether any of your finger work has run into that.
I haven't seen that.
Okay, I just looked it up. There's a Wikipedia page. It's Chisan-bok.
Okay.
It was a big thing in the 70s.
Yeah. Remember that?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Can you spell it, David?
CHISANBOP.
CHISAN.
I could hear Morley Safer talking about it in my head, and I hadn't thought about finger counting since then until this talk. So there you go.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and it's cool. At the back.
You mentioned that there was no wall. Can you elaborate on that? The research that.
Yeah. So the idea of the wall is that everybody has a limit to how much they can learn mathematically, and that you can only go to your wall, and you can't go further than that. And so what the brain science is telling us is that isn't the case, and that people's brains can grow and change according to the needs they have, actually. That just as the cab drivers needed that area of the brain to be able to do that complex training, and the brain will grow as you need that. So it's pretty incredible what the brain can do, and what they now know the brain can do. Does that answer your question?
Not exactly, I guess, but maybe it's not. So for me, this is a difficult idea, just because mathematics has this history of problems being unsolved for hundreds of years. So I definitely believe some of those problems, they're just not accessible to me. I'm not going to be the one that has the new idea to solve this 100-year-old. So
maybe that's true. I mean, our brains are growing and changing all the time. By the time you get to being an 18-year-old, your opportunities for brain growth, and there have been millions and millions and millions of them, and who knows who can develop whatever brain region they need in that time frame to be able to solve a particular math problem. It's not that anybody can say, well, I'm getting there within 6 months or whatever.
Right.
But I think what we know is that there may be problems that nobody can ever solve, and they never develop. But what we know is that everybody has kind of unlimited potential to grow and change. What that means for the highest levels, I don't know yet.
I have two questions. One is, you talked about the whole social aspect of learning and how you feel and self-esteem and stuff like that, and then you talked about these methods of teaching. And I'm always suspicious of people who say, I've got this great method, and really they're charismatic and they make the students feel great, and if they taught with any garbage method, they get great results. So are these studies about having people work on the problems before you teach them well controlled for the personality of the teacher, the energy of the teacher, and things
Yeah,
like
we
that.
have enough, I think, now in education that we do know that there are methods that work and that you can train teachers to teach those methods.
And they transcend the personality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you that there are personalities and ways of being that are going to be more successful with kids, definitely.
Well, you said so
But
yourself.
you
You say, I believe in you and things like that.
But you can train a teacher to, we have many teachers who teach in one way and they have high failure rates, and we train them and they teach differently and the kids start achieving at high levels. So we did, definitely yes.
Okay, the other one is, what is mathematics? And you talked about the classroom versus the PhD defense. And, for most of our education, math that people are going to use in their lives has nothing to do with the PhD defense. So to me, it's really there. Just like an engineering math is different than math, and real math is another step in that direction.
Well,
So we talk about math education.
There's a
It's like a different
difference.
thing.
There's a difference. I agree with you. But it shouldn't be so different that people don't even recognize the subject. I mean, if you look at professors of English literature, and what they do with books and analysis, you see kids doing that, similar things in classrooms. You see them reading and enjoying books, and in mathematics, you just see a totally different activity. And what you see in graduate level mathematics is people really doing mathematics. And what you see in classrooms is kids answering short questions. They're very far from each other, and I think you're right, there should be a difference. But it shouldn't be that the kid, you can't even recognize those two as the same subject. Yeah, back.
I'm curious how much of this applies, say, at the undergraduate level. I think of this because I have a significant amount of personal experience, say, in teaching an introductory data science course where at least half the students seemingly have come through this background where they've been turned off to math. And is there any, is age 18 to 22 already too late?
No,
or is there a lot we can learn from this?
Yeah, no, all of this applies to adults. I mean, the brain science is quite incredible. They found that the greatest brain science that retired people had, this was a big study that they published, came when they took an art class. Because the art class was more different for most of the adults than any of the other things they did. So, I mean, many studies are showing brain growth into 60s, 70s. They've studied all sorts of different people. So, and in terms of the teaching methods, we also know that engaging undergrads actively in a broad mathematics instead of the watch me do math and then repeat it method is very good for undergrads as well. So we have a lot of K-12 educators who are with us, but this, I would say, perfectly applies to higher levels. I watched a wonderful class that Steve taught yesterday where the undergrads were working on math problems and proving together and collaborating, and it was amazing. And they were very happy. Yeah?
Do you believe in dyslexia or aphantasia?
Yeah, actually my daughter has dyslexia.
But you believe we don't have walls?
So there are kids with special needs for whom it's much harder. And even with dyslexia, I mean, they have brain studies now that show that kids can grow the brain areas that are missing for them in dyslexia, again, in a very short period of time with the right training. But there are some kids for whom the special needs are so severe that it's very, very hard for us to think that they could take calculus, say. But really, we're talking about 5% of kids who are in that category. And the rest of the kids could be in calculus classes, but we have nowhere near that number, that proportion.
So is there a distinction between a wall and a special need apart from the numbers of
I mean, the concept of the wall is the idea that everybody has a limit, and nobody has a limit whether you have special needs or not, and the brain science applies equally to people with brain injury of any type, that the limits are not there, that they can grow and change. I mean, you may have to, if somebody has a severe brain injury, you may have to adjust, what you think people can get to, but the sky, is the limit for everybody, really. I mean, the brain change and the brain growth. In fact, some of the most amazing, incredible evidence has come from people with brain injuries. and what has happened in the sort of the regrowth of the brain. It's quite amazing. Yeah.
Hi. So I have to preface my question.
Okay.
I'm a computational modeler and I work on fluid mechanics because I think it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up actually, despite this accent, I grew up in Greece, so I come from a different math culture in this country. And it's been a big adjustment. And I teach the engineering computation class, which involves second and third year engineers. And I'm seeing a lot of these factors you brought up, the fear of math. And a big part is teaching them, that it's not the fastest one that works. You need a certain resilience, you need a certain clarity, you need to see patterns, you need to learn how to fail. And my question for you is though, there's this huge shortage of US students that are going in that direction, even more so female students. At this very core level where you're working on the math side, right, more calculus, there's also discrete mathematics, and kids are getting a slight indication of that with some algebra. Are there any efforts on learning to compromise, like teaching people how to tackle these fears on the computer side as well, and blend the two together at the K through 12 level?
On the computer side?
So learning how to, the computer is your tool, right?
Yeah,
and you use discrete mathematics of the computer to tackle an engineering or physics problem. Or is there some effort to, you're sort of restructuring people's perspectives on learning mathematics. Is there something on computer education in high schools that's following along a similar path?
I think so, yeah. CS is really interesting, and particularly in gender, as you may know, the gender statistics in computer science is tragic, and declining numbers of women every time you look at it. And we know that students are coming to classes who are sort of particularly damaged. I'm not sure about computer education in schools. We're doing something now which you might be interested in, which is we're making a new high school class for California, a 12th grade math class, because so many students take 3 years of math, go to community college, get placed into remedial math classes, their college career ends at that point for many of them. And we're making it actually with Conrad Wolfram and Wolfram Alpha. And they have a lovely range of online, interactive, modeling statistics, computer-based math. Conrad Wolfram is kind of leading this real charge to take out hand calculation out of the curriculum and have kids use computers instead, and is a huge, their tagline is mathematics does not equal calculation. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but there's some really interesting work going on.
Are there resources on your website or links that point to that? Like on your website, do you have links that point to this effort?
To that
Yeah.
I just talked about? No, we've just started it actually.
Okay.
So we can talk about it if you want to ask me. Yeah, I'll come to you in a second.
Is there any evidence that would indicate that somehow use of pencil and paper when sort of working out problems has some sort of a cognitive benefit, given that there's this sort of finger perception? And this would sort of lead into Pete's question about like computing, and I'm just curious about it because I have this theory that we haven't really changed much since ancient times, and I wonder if if working things out on pencil and paper sometimes has some sort of a positive effect.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. That's an interesting question. I can't tell you, right? But yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Essentially my question.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate more on this to the point of finger perception? First, like how is it connected to doing better at math? And is it math in general or just arithmetic and counting? And why is it a causal factor rather than just a correlation?
I think it is arithmetic and number. So he was asking to say more about the finger perception and why it helps math, and whether it's math in particular, or is it number or arithmetic, or I think it is number. It is number work and calculation that the finger perception correlates with. So what they know is it's part of the development of a sense of number is this finger area of the brain and seeing this visual of fingers. In the same way, they know that numbers are actually held in the brain on a number line. And when they teach kids number lines in school, it dramatically increases what they can do achievement-wise. And So what do these things mean that you know that the brain is seeing numbers in this way? I don't think they know a huge amount about that. I think brain science is still in its early days. They know that this finger area is helping with the development of number and number understanding. But I don't know, and I'm not a neuroscientist. If they were here, they might say something different to this. But it's early days, but they certainly know that finger perception is a really important.
So we have refreshments next door in 657. You're all welcome to come, and we can ask further questions in there if you have some. Thanks very much.